This video is about functions. Functions really are at the heart of the C programming language and most programming languages in general. We're going to go through what is a function and all the different ways in which you can use a function. There are lots of different functions in C, and most of them are organized into libraries. You can see a lot of those libraries in the top of a C program in these #include statements. So the libraries which we use in the early parts of this series are stdio, stdlib, lib, math. There's a math library that has cosine, sine, square root, that kind of stuff. And string, that does string manipulation functions. And so you can imagine, so cosine is a good example of a function. You input an angle, you get out the cosine of that angle. And that's basically the description of all functions. They do more than just math. They do all sorts of other things as well. The general format is that the output of the function is equal to the function name and then in parentheses a comma-separated list of arguments. Almost all functions in C end with a semicolon. Not all, but the vast majority of them. So that's the ordinary format. But here's the thing is, you don't have to, if you don't want to, if it's not necessary, you don't have to assign the output to be equal to something. You can just call the function name without an equal sign in front of it. And you don't even need to have an argument list. With a very small number of them, you can omit the argument list as well. Some things just have default settings and you just want to do the default setting, and so you just call a function with a default setting. Moreover, an argument list can have a variable number of arguments. Sometimes there's more arguments, sometimes there are fewer, depending on the context of how you're using that function. So those are all the different rules of functions and function calls. I'm going to give you a handful of examples here. The first example here, and this is going to be in one of the programs that we're doing early on, and you're going to see several different function calls. The bottom one there is called fclose. It closes up a file. It doesn't. We're not doing anything with the return value. It's just we're closing a file, and it has one input argument. In this case, it's called fp, as a variable fp. At the top here, you can see the opening of the file, and it does have an equal sign, and it does assign a value to this variable fp, and so fp equals fopen, and then there are two arguments, and we're going to learn what those arguments are. That's one thing, but there's two arguments separated by a comma. There's a third example of a function in here called fscanf. It's scanning data from a file, and it's in the middle of all sorts of other things. And we're going to go into exactly how, more details into how we can do that as well. Another function that we use a lot is printf statement. Print something out to the screen. It's the very first function we use in this series. And here you can see that I'm printing out the average of some numbers. And so there's two arguments. The first argument is this string of characters in double quotes. And this second argument happens to be the variable that contains the average value of some numbers that we calculated. So that has no output and two input arguments. But you can also see I use the printf statement and saying the average of a certain number of points is equal to that average. And so there are two variables that we're printing out, n, the number of points, and the average. And so there's still one string at the beginning, but now there are two arguments after that, comma, then n, comma, then average. So printf in the first one had two input arguments, and the second one had three input arguments. So printf can have more than one input arguments in them. So they can have a variable number of input arguments. It depends on all sorts of things. So so that's just a nuance there, that the input argument list can change in functions. All right, so now back to the case of that fscanf where it's in the middle of something. How can we do that? Here's yet another one. It uses the pow command. Pow is power. So we're taking something raised to a power, in this case squared. The power is 2.0. There are two input arguments, whatever we're taking the square of, and then the power that we're taking it to, square, 2.0. And it's in the middle of a mathematical expression. How does that work? Well, this is the return value of a function still happens. The C programming language replaces that function call with its return value in the equation. Just like in the while statement, just like that fscanf thing, it did it as well for whatever statement it was on the inside. It's the equivalent of coming up with a whole new variable and saying b equals pow, blah, 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 to the square power. And then sum equals sum plus b, just replacing that in the second line. Instead of doing it in 2 steps, it does it all in 1 step. The return value of a function is always there. It's just whether or not we assign it to a value or use it inside of an equation. That's always a wild card. Those are some of the details about function calls. The best thing you can do as you're watching through these videos is just pay attention to all the different function calls and how they're used. And eventually you're going to get used to a lot of them and learning about how to access the libraries and learn new functions on your own.